I never thought heartbreak had a sound until I heard my husband's laugh echoing across Malibu Beach. It was carefree, loud, and sharp enough to slice through my chest. I stood barefoot in the sand, the ocean rolling up to kiss my ankles, as I watched him drape his arm around her, the secretary I once pitied. Her name was Ashley. 27, flawless, with legs that looked airbrushed even in the harsh sunlight. She tossed her head back when he whispered something, her blonde hair catching the California sun like a halo. People were staring, of course they were. My husband, or ex-husband now, loved an audience. "Smile for the cameras, darling," he used to say when we were together, tugging me into his side at charity galas. But now, it wasn't me he was parading. It was her. My best friend Jenna nudged me gently. "You don't have to watch this, Claire." But I couldn't look away. My stomach twisted with rage and humiliation. Malibu wasn't just any beach, it had been our place. The place where we'd walked at sunset when he first proposed. And now, he was turning it into his victory stage, parading Ashley around as if to say, "I've traded up." "You think he brought her here on purpose?" Jenna asked. Of course he did. My voice cracked. This isn't love. This is a performance. Jenna crossed her arms. Well, let him perform. I've got news for you, karma's already warming up backstage. I gave her a confused look, but before I could ask what she meant, I heard a booming laugh, not from my ex, but from someone behind us. I turned, and there he was. Mr. Whitmore. My ex's father. A man of wealth, power, and terrifying composure. He rarely appeared in public without a tailored suit, but today, in linen slacks and a casual shirt, he looked almost human. Almost. He walked up slowly, his cane digging into the sand, his sharp eyes cutting from me to his son. His lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. Well, well, he muttered, almost to himself. The circus has come to town. Jenna grabbed my arm. Claire, why is he here? I swallowed hard. I hadn't seen Mr. Whitmore since the divorce papers were signed. He never liked me much, but he never pretended to like his son either. Their relationship was complicated, to say the least. And yet, something about the way he was watching his son now, almost amused, almost pitying, made my skin prickle. He leaned closer to me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Don't worry, my dear. Let him flaunt his secretary. Let him gloat. He has no idea what's coming. I blinked. What do you mean? He straightened, his eyes fixed on his son laughing in the distance. His inheritance, he said coldly, isn't going to play out the way he thinks it will. And just like that, he walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. The ocean roared in my ears. My ex-husband thought he'd won, parading Ashley, humiliating me, but suddenly, it felt like I was standing at the edge of something bigger. Something he couldn't see coming. And for the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. The day after Malibu, I woke up with that same laugh still lodged in my skull, the sound of my ex-husband flaunting his new life as if my years with him had been nothing but a bad rehearsal. I sat at the kitchen counter of my small apartment, staring at a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, trying to remind myself that I wasn't crazy for feeling shattered. Jenna had slept over, curled up on my couch like a loyal guard dog, but even her presence couldn't stop the ache that sat heavy in my chest. My phone buzzed with a notification and I almost didn't want to look, but curiosity clawed at me until I picked it up. There he was, plastered across social media, shirtless on the beach, Ashley glued to his side, the caption screaming, "Love always wins." I laughed bitterly. Wins? At what? Destroying a marriage? Rubbing salt in wounds? I tossed the phone down, the screen cracking against the counter, and whispered to myself, let him have his circus. Still, the humiliation burned, and the words of Mr. Whitmore from yesterday echoed in my mind, his inheritance isn't going to play out the way he thinks. Why would his father tell me that? Why would he even care? The Whitmores were an empire, a dynasty of cold faces and sharp smiles, and I had always been the outsider who never quite fit. My ex loved to remind me of that whenever we fought. "You'll never belong in this family, Claire," he used to spit when anger overtook charm. And yet, his father had leaned toward me at that beach, his voice carrying a secret that suddenly made me believe maybe my ex's downfall wasn't going to come from me, but from the bloodline he thought protected him. Around noon, Jenna stirred awake and padded into the kitchen, her hair a wild halo. "You're brooding," she said, grabbing a slice of toast. "What's new?" I shrugged. "I can't stop thinking about what his father said." Jenna arched an eyebrow. "About the inheritance? Maybe the old man's cutting him off." "That would be poetic." I shook my head slowly. "No, it felt bigger. Like, he wanted me to know something." Jenna smirked. "Then maybe you'll end up richer than both of them. Imagine the headlines." We both laughed, but inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that my story with the Whitmores wasn't over. I had tried to walk away, tried to reclaim my life in this small apartment with its peeling paint and humming refrigerator, but fate, or karma, as Jenna liked to say, had a cruel sense of timing. Later that evening, as the sun bled orange across the city, a knock rattled my door. My heart jumped. When I opened it, a man in a sharp gray suit stood there holding an envelope. "Claire Whitmore," he asked formally, and the sound of that last name attached to me again made my stomach twist. "Ex," I corrected, but he only nodded, handing me the thick envelope before turning on his heel. Jenna appeared at my shoulder instantly. "What is it?" My fingers trembled as I tore it open, and out slid a letter embossed with the Whitmore family crest. I skimmed the words, my eyes widening with every line. Mr. Whitmore was sick, terminal, the letter explained. He was calling for me specifically, requesting my presence at the Whitmore estate in a week's time for a family gathering that would include the reading of his will. My breath caught. "Why me?" I whispered. Jenna leaned over my shoulder, reading quickly. "Holy shit, Claire. He actually wants you there. This is huge." I stared at the words, my mind spinning. My ex was going to flaunt his secretary, he was going to live like the king of Malibu, but his father, the kingmaker himself, had just pulled me back into the game. And suddenly, I realized this wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about power, legacy, and secrets buried in a family I thought I had escaped. The Whitmore estate always felt less like a home and more like a fortress carved into the hillside, towering glass walls and marble floors designed to remind anyone who entered that power lived here. When I drove up the winding driveway a week later, my palms were slick against the steering wheel, my heart pounding with every passing second. I hadn't set foot here since the divorce, since the night my ex hurled my suitcase down those same steps and told me to get out, his voice breaking only when he thought no one was listening. Now, as the massive front doors opened, I was met not with hostility but with silence so sharp it felt like judgment. A butler I didn't recognize nodded stiffly and led me inside where I could already hear voices echoing off the high ceilings. My ex was there, of course, standing with a glass of whiskey in one hand and Ashley clinging to the other, her designer heels clicking against the marble as if she owned the place already. He spotted me immediately, his grin spreading wide, venom disguised as charm. Well, if it isn't my ex-wife," he announced loudly enough for every cousin, uncle, and business partner in the room to hear. "Didn't expect you'd have the guts to show up." Ashley giggled, resting her manicured hand on his chest, and whispered something I couldn't hear but knew was cruel. The room chuckled, siding with him, because that was always the way it worked, no one dared laugh at the heir apparent. I wanted to shrink into the floor, but then I remembered Mr. Whitmore's voice at Malibu, cold and certain, he has no idea what's coming. That memory alone straightened my spine. I forced a calm smile. "I was invited," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "By your father." The grin faltered for just a second, but Ashley tugged him closer, whispering again, and he covered it with another laugh. Before the scene could escalate, the sound of a cane striking marble silenced the room. All heads turned. Mr. Whitmore entered slowly, thinner than I remembered, his frame draped in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the toll illness had taken. Still, his eyes burned with the same fierce clarity, cutting through the crowd until they landed on me. "Claire," he said simply, his voice echoing, commanding. "Come with me." Whispers erupted as I followed him down the hall, past oil paintings of ancestors glaring down with icy approval. My ex's eyes bored into my back the whole way, fury radiating from him like heat. When the study door shut behind us, the noise of the party faded, replaced by the soft tick of an antique clock. Mr. Whitmore lowered himself into a leather chair, motioning for me to sit opposite. I hesitated. "Sir, I don't understand why I'm here. I'm not family anymore." His lips twitched. "You were never truly welcomed as family, and yet, you are the only one who ever saw my son for what he really is." My breath caught. "And what is he?" Mr. Whitmore leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "A fool. Spoiled. Reckless. He believes love is performance and money is infinite. He thinks he's untouchable. But I built this empire, and I will not watch him destroy it." I swallowed hard, unsure where this was going. "So why me?" He studied me for a long moment before answering. "Because you endured him. You know his weaknesses. And because my will is not what he thinks." My pulse quickened. "Your will?" He nodded slowly, his voice dropping lower. "When I die, the inheritance will not go directly to him. I've structured it differently. He will have to prove himself, or he will lose everything." I stared, stunned. "And what do I have to do with that?" For the first time, a faint smile tugged at his lips. "You may very well be the key to teaching him what he has never learned, humility. And if he cannot learn, then someone else, someone worthy, will rise in his place." My mind spun, the weight of his words sinking in. He wasn't just warning me about the will. He was placing me inside it. And suddenly, the humiliation of Malibu felt like the spark of a much bigger fire. The dining room of the Whitmore estate stretched long and intimidating, a glossy mahogany table lit by a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a European palace. Every seat was filled with Whitmores and their spouses, all stiff smiles and sharp eyes, forks clinking against fine china as though this were just another polite family gathering. But it wasn't. Not tonight. I could feel it in the way conversations hushed the moment I entered, in the way every gaze flicked between me and my ex as though waiting for blood to spill across the linen tablecloth. My ex sat near the head of the table, Ashley draped over him like a jewel he couldn't stop flaunting, her laughter piercing through the air every time he whispered something in her ear. When I slipped into the seat Mr. Whitmore's butler indicated, directly across from them, his grin widened, smug and sharp. "Funny seeing you here," he said loudly, raising his glass so the whole table turned toward me. "I guess some people just can't let go of the family perks, huh?" Laughter rippled down the table, shallow and obedient, but it faltered when Mr. Whitmore entered. The room shifted instantly, the air heavy with the weight of his presence. He lowered himself into the head chair, his cane resting against the table, his eyes scanning us all with quiet calculation. He didn't speak until silence blanketed the room. "This may be one of our last dinners together," he said evenly, and a chill ran through me. No one dared interrupt. "I've gathered you all here not just for food, but for truth. My health declines, and when I am gone, the future of this family must be secured." My ex straightened, puffing his chest, clearly expecting his moment to shine. Ashley's smile widened as if she'd already won the crown. But Mr. Whitmore's gaze lingered on me instead, and I could feel my ex's anger pulsing across the table like a storm ready to break. "Claire," Mr. Whitmore said suddenly, his voice slicing through the quiet. "What do you think of my son parading his secretary like a prize?" Gasps filled the air. Forks froze midair. My ex slammed his glass down, eyes blazing. "Father, that's..." But Mr. Whitmore held up a hand, silencing him. All eyes landed on me, waiting. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to meet the old man's gaze. I think, I said carefully, my voice trembling at first but gaining strength, that love doesn't need an audience. And that anyone who needs to flaunt it probably doesn't have it. The words hung heavy in the air, a weapon disguised as honesty. My ex's face flushed crimson, Ashley's smile faltered, and for the first time, I felt the power tilt slightly in my direction. Mr. Whitmore chuckled softly, though it quickly turned into a cough he smothered with a handkerchief. Wise words, he rasped. From someone who has suffered the consequences of his vanity. My ex shoved back his chair, his voice rising. This is ridiculous. You're humiliating me in front of everyone, and for what? To make her look better? He jabbed a finger at me, his control unraveling. She's nothing. She always was nothing. And dragging her back here won't change that. A hush fell. Mr. Whitmore's expression hardened, his voice sharp as a blade. Sit down. The command was quiet, but it carried the weight of thunder. My ex hesitated, chest heaving, then reluctantly lowered himself back into his chair, muttering curses under his breath. I could feel every eye on me, some sympathetic, most curious, all sensing the crack forming in the air's armor. Mr. Whitmore took a slow sip of wine before speaking again. You think you are untouchable, my son, he said, voice low but cutting. But soon you will learn the truth. Money is not infinite. Respect is not guaranteed. And your inheritance is not assured. Gasps rippled again, sharper this time, as my ex's jaw dropped. Ashley's nails dug into his arm, her wide eyes betraying the first flicker of fear. The chandelier's crystals shimmered above us, but the true spectacle was unfolding right at that table, an heir exposed, a dynasty on the edge of rupture, and me caught in the center of it all. The dinner ended not with dessert but with silence so thick it felt like suffocation. After Mr. Whitmore's warning about the inheritance, the table had fallen into uneasy whispers, eyes darting between him, me, and the heir who suddenly didn't look so untouchable. My ex sat stiff, his jaw clenched, his hand gripping his glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Ashley tried to soothe him, whispering in his ear, stroking his arm, but even she looked shaken, her confidence cracked. As the others filtered out of the dining room, murmuring among themselves, I slipped toward the terrace, desperate for air. The night was cool, the ocean breeze carrying the faint scent of salt and jasmine. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let it wash over me, trying to calm the storm that had been building in my chest since Malibu. But peace never lasted long in this family. The door banged open and my ex stormed out, his footsteps pounding across the stone. What the hell are you doing here? He snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut. I turned slowly, meeting his glare. I told you. I was invited. He laughed bitterly, stepping closer, his whiskey breath hot in the cool air. You think you've won something because my father still likes you? Don't kid yourself. You're nothing without me. You always were. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to flinch. Funny, that's not what your father seems to think. His eyes narrowed, fury flashing. He slammed his hand against the terrace railing. He's dying, Claire. Dying. And when he's gone, everything will be mine. The company, the estate, the fortune. You think a few kind words will change that? His voice cracked at the edges, betraying the fear under the arrogance, and in that moment I saw the truth, he wasn't certain anymore. Mr. Whitmore's words had cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Before I could respond, the study door creaked open behind us and Mr. Whitmore himself stepped out, his cane tapping against the stone. His gaze flicked from me to his son, cold and calculating. You assume too much, he said quietly, and my ex froze. You assume that blood alone grants you privilege. But blood without honor is poison. My ex's voice wavered. What are you saying? Mr. Whitmore's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. I am saying, my boy, that you should prepare yourself. When my will is read, you may find yourself far poorer than you've ever imagined. Ashley appeared in the doorway then, her eyes wide, her grip tightening on the frame as though she needed support. My ex spun toward her, desperate now. He's bluffing, he said, his voice rising. He has to be bluffing. But the look in her eyes told me even she wasn't sure anymore. Mr. Whitmore turned his back on us, slowly retreating into the house. Enjoy the evening, he muttered. It may be one of your last as the man you think you are. The door closed behind him, leaving the three of us in stunned silence. My ex's fists clenched at his sides, his body trembling with rage, but I saw something else there too, fear. For the first time, he realized the throne he had been flaunting might not be his after all. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just an observer in this war. I was becoming a weapon. The morning after the dinner felt heavier than the night before, as if the mansion itself had absorbed every ounce of tension and now exhaled it back into the halls. I woke early in the guest room they had assigned me, the curtains drawn back to reveal a pale gray sky over the ocean, the kind of weather that made the waves crash harder, angrier. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed Mr. Whitmore's words, the way he had spoken them so deliberately in front of the entire family. It wasn't an accident. He wanted everyone to know that the will wasn't going to be the coronation my ex expected. By the time I stepped into the grand hall, the whispers had already started. Aunts huddled in corners, cousins murmured over coffee, uncles speculated in low voices, and every one of them glanced at me when they thought I wouldn't notice. I was the outsider, the ex-wife who had no business being here, yet suddenly I was at the center of the story everyone wanted to unravel. Jenna texted me from back in the city, "You okay?" I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "Not sure." Things are complicated. Complicated was an understatement. As I slipped into the breakfast room, I found Ashley sitting alone at the table, her phone in one hand, her coffee untouched in front of her. She looked up when she saw me, her usual smug smile absent. "So," she said flatly, "you must be loving this." I raised an eyebrow. "Loving what?" She scoffed. "Don't play dumb. The whole family is buzzing that your precious father-in-law might cut his own son out of the will. And you, somehow, you're right in the middle of it." Her words were sharp, but her voice cracked at the edges, and I realized she was rattled. I sat down across from her, studying her carefully. "If you're so sure he's bluffing, why does it bother you?" Her jaw tightened, her hand tightening around the phone until her knuckles whitened. "Because if he's not bluffing, then everything we've worked for, everything we planned, it all falls apart." The "we" caught my attention. She wasn't just a fling. She saw herself as part of his future, maybe even as Mrs. Whitmore someday. But now, the ground under her stilettos was crumbling. I leaned forward, my voice low. "Maybe you should be asking yourself why you tied your future to someone who never really earned anything himself." Her eyes flashed with anger, but she didn't respond, and that silence told me everything. She was starting to doubt him. Later that day, the family gathered in the drawing room, pretending to sip tea and admire the art while really just circling like vultures. My ex stood in the center, pacing, his voice loud and defensive as he tried to convince them that his father was bluffing, that nothing about the inheritance had changed. But doubt was already seated. "You heard him," one cousin muttered. "He said it in front of everyone." "He's sick," another replied. "Maybe he's not thinking clearly." Or maybe, an aunt whispered, "he wants to punish his son for embarrassing the family name." I watched it all unfold from the edge of the room, invisible but listening, as my ex's kingdom began to crumble from within. His voice grew harsher, more desperate, until finally he pointed at me across the room. "This is her fault," he shouted. "He's doing this to punish me for leaving her. He wants to make me look weak by propping her up." All eyes swung to me, heavy and searching, but before I could speak, Mr. Whitmore's voice cut through the chaos from the doorway. "No," he said simply, his cane tapping the floor with each step. "I am doing this because weakness must never inherit power. The room fell silent as he entered, his gaze sweeping over the family like a blade. My ex's face drained of color, Ashley's hand slipped from his arm, and the whispers that had filled the house all morning suddenly had the weight of prophecy. The will was real. The threat was real. And for the first time, everyone in that room believed it. The announcement came that evening, not with ceremony but with the casual cruelty only Mr. Whitmore could command. We were summoned to the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes no one had touched in decades, the air thick with dust and authority. The family gathered, buzzing with nervous energy, and I stood near the back, trying to blend into the shadows. Mr. Whitmore sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, his cane resting against the armrest, his thin fingers folded together. His face looked pale, drawn, but his eyes still gleamed with the sharpness of a man who controlled everything even from the edge of death. When he finally spoke, the room went silent. "Since you all seem so concerned with what will happen after I am gone," he began, his voice low but steady, "let us clear the air. My will is written. The conditions are set." My ex leaned forward, his knuckles white on the back of a chair. Finally, he muttered, but the arrogance in his voice couldn't quite cover the tremor underneath. Mr. Whitmore's gaze slid to him, cold and unwavering. "Do not celebrate too quickly. The Whitmore fortune will not simply be handed to you. It must be earned." Murmurs broke out instantly. A cousin gasped. An uncle frowned. My ex's face twisted in disbelief. "Earned? I'm your only son. I'm the rightful heir. That's not something to earn, it's my birthright." Mr. Whitmore's lips curved into the faintest smile, but it was sharp, almost mocking. "Birthright is nothing without character. And you have shown me none." Gasps rippled through the room, Ashley stiffened beside him, and for the first time I saw true panic flash in his eyes. "What are you saying?" he demanded. Mr. Whitmore's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "The company, the estate, and the accounts will be placed in trust. You will receive nothing, absolutely nothing, until you prove yourself capable of leading with dignity, responsibility, and restraint. Until then, you will be subject to oversight, and certain assets will be redirected where I see fit." My ex staggered back as though struck, his mouth opening and closing but no words forming. Ashley clutched his arm, her nails digging into his skin, but she couldn't mask her own fear. An aunt whispered, "Redirected? To who?" My stomach flipped when Mr. Whitmore's gaze flicked briefly to me before returning to his son. He didn't say my name, but the implication hung heavy in the air. My ex caught it instantly, rage igniting in his face. "Her," he shouted, pointing at me with shaking hands. "You'd give it to her? After everything? She's not even family anymore." Mr. Whitmore didn't flinch. "She is more family than you have ever been." The words landed like thunder. The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping, speculation flying. My ex lunged toward me, his voice breaking with fury. "You think you can take everything from me? You think you can stand there and watch me lose everything I deserve?" His face was inches from mine, his breath ragged, his body trembling, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I met his eyes and said quietly, "Maybe you don't deserve it." His hand twitched like he wanted to strike me, but the heavy slam of a cane against the floor froze him in place. Mr. Whitmore's voice rang out. "Enough." Silence fell instantly. He leaned forward, his voice lower now but no less commanding. "If you cannot rise above this pettiness, you will lose everything. The conditions are final. Fight them if you wish, but you will lose more than money." My ex's chest heaved, his fists clenched, but he said nothing. The family stared, caught between fascination and fear, and I knew in that moment the lines had been drawn. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about survival. The house didn't sleep that night. After Mr. Whitmore dropped his bombshell, the air turned electric, humming with whispers in the hallways and hushed conversations behind closed doors. Servants moved quietly, eyes wide, as though the walls themselves might shatter under the weight of secrets. I tried to retreat to the guest room, but everywhere I went, I felt the family's eyes on me, curious, judgmental, fearful. They all knew the unspoken truth. I had suddenly become a threat. I had just sat on the edge of the bed when I heard shouting echoing down the corridor. My ex. His voice rose and fell like crashing waves, sharp and desperate. I opened the door a crack and saw him pacing in the gallery, Ashley trailing behind him like a shadow that no longer wanted to be attached. "He can't do this to me," he shouted, running his hands through his hair, wild and frantic. "He's bluffing. It's a test. He'll come to his senses. He has to." Ashley's voice, usually syrupy and confident, was thin and trembling. "But what if he's not bluffing? What if he really changes everything? We've been planning around this money." He spun on her, his face twisted, and I thought for a second he might explode. "Planning? You mean spending? Designer clothes, trips, Malibu. You think I don't notice? You've been bleeding me dry, Ashley." She recoiled as though struck, her lips parting in shock. "Don't you dare blame this on me. I didn't ruin things with your father. I didn't turn him against you. You did that all by yourself." Her words hung in the air like a dagger, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in their perfect facade. He lunged closer, his finger jabbing at her chest. "You wouldn't even be here if it weren't for me. Do you think he cares about you? Do you think anyone in this family respects you? Without me, you're nothing." Ashley's face hardened, her fear sharpening into anger. "Then maybe I'd be better off without you." The silence that followed was louder than the shouting had been. My ex froze, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with betrayal. I could almost see the thoughts spinning in his head, panic, rage, desperation, before he turned and hurled a vase against the wall. The crash echoed down the hall, shards scattering like sparks. I stepped back into the shadows, heart racing, praying they wouldn't notice me, but Ashley's eyes flicked toward my hiding spot. For a split second, our gazes locked, and I saw something I hadn't expected: fear, yes, but also calculation. She wasn't just doubting him. She was weighing her options. When she looked back at him, her voice softened, dripping with false sweetness. "You're right. I shouldn't have said that. We'll figure this out. Together." But the way she touched his arm, hesitant, almost rehearsed, told me the truth. She was already pulling away. My ex collapsed onto a chair, burying his face in his hands, muttering curses under his breath. He looked smaller somehow, like a boy who had lost his way in a game he thought he'd already won. Watching him like that, I felt something I hadn't in years, not pity, exactly, but recognition. He was unraveling, and he didn't even see it. The inheritance wasn't just money to him. It was his identity, his proof that he was worth something. And now that it was slipping away, so was he. I closed the door quietly and leaned against it, my pulse still racing. For the first time, I realized the real danger wasn't Mr. Whitmore's conditions. It was what my ex might do when he realized he was losing everything. I didn't expect Ashley to find me, but by mid-morning, there she was, standing hesitantly outside my guest room door, her posture defensive, her designer heels clicking softly against the marble. I opened it a crack, bracing for confrontation, but her face was uncertain, almost human in a way I hadn't thought possible. "Claire," she said quietly, her voice stripped of the practiced sweetness she usually wore like armor. I folded my arms, keeping my expression neutral. "Ashley, to what do I owe the pleasure?" She swallowed, clearly debating whether to step inside. I think we need to talk," she said finally. "About him." I raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe. "What about him?" She shifted from foot to foot, avoiding my eyes. "He's losing it. The conditions, the will, he can't handle it. And I don't want to be dragged down with him. I don't know what to do." My chest tightened. I had expected arrogance, confrontation, maybe even hatred. But fear and confusion? That was new. I motioned for her to step inside. Sit, I said simply, and she lowered herself into a chair, hands folded in her lap, eyes darting around like she was expecting someone to burst in at any moment. You know what he's capable of, don't you? I asked, my voice calm but firm. I've seen it, she admitted, her lips pressing into a thin line. I didn't want to believe it, but now I see the man I thought I could count on isn't the man he pretends to be. And I'm scared, Claire. I don't want to be collateral. I leaned closer, keeping my tone neutral but icy. Collateral? He made his choices long before this, Ashley. And now he's realizing the consequences. You have a choice too. Stay and burn with him, or step away while you still can. She glanced at me, eyes wide, conflicted. I don't know if I can just walk away. He'll hate me. He'll hate you anyway, I interrupted, cutting through her hesitation. The difference is whether you live or just survive in his shadow. Right now, he's unraveling, and if you stay, you'll fall with him. If you leave, you might actually survive. Her fingers trembled slightly, twisting in her lap. And you're really going to inherit? Or at least have a chance? I shrugged, letting the smallest smirk tug at my lips. Not yet. But he's already lost more than he realizes. And his father's conditions, well, they favor anyone who's smart enough to see opportunity. She exhaled shakily, and for the first time, I sensed a glimmer of relief. Then, maybe I should step back. Before it's too late. I nodded, my mind racing with the possibilities. She wasn't my enemy. She was just another piece in a game neither of us had wanted to play, but one that could finally be turned to our advantage. Good, I said quietly. Because right now, he's alone in his panic. And when the right moment comes, being alone isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. She looked at me then, her lips barely parted, as if absorbing the weight of what I had just said. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't know who else to turn to. I gave her a small, knowing smile. Welcome to reality, Ashley. It's messy, and it's dangerous, but if you play it right, you just might survive it. By the next morning, the Whitmore estate felt more like a battlefield than a home. I could hear my ex's footsteps pounding down the hall long before he reached the grand hall, his voice carrying anger and desperation like a storm warning. He was on the phone, yelling at someone, an executive, a lawyer, someone powerless to calm the hurricane he'd become. Ashley was behind him, her eyes darting nervously, clutching her purse like a lifeline. I watched from the edge of the staircase, my pulse steady, my mind already calculating the angles. He slammed the phone down just as I stepped into the room, his face red, eyes wild. They don't understand. Nobody understands. I'm the only one who can run this company. I built it, I deserve it. His words ricocheted off the marble floors, bouncing back into the cavernous hall. I took a careful step forward, keeping my tone neutral but pointed. And yet your father doesn't agree. That's why you're panicking. He spun toward me, his face contorted in fury. You're enjoying this, aren't you? You're smiling behind that fake calm. Admit it. You want to see me fail. I didn't flinch. I want you to face reality. That's all. And the reality is you're not untouchable. Not anymore. Ashley stepped closer, her voice wavering. Maybe he's right. Maybe you need to calm down before you make mistakes. He whipped around, pointing at her now, his voice shaking. Don't you dare side with her. You swore you were with me. Her lips pressed together, eyes wide, and I saw it, hesitation, doubt, fear, all the cracks forming in the armor of the man who once believed himself invincible. I don't know, she admitted softly. I just don't want to see it all fall apart. The words were barely audible, but he heard them. His body shook with rage, his hands trembling as he tried to maintain control. Fall apart? Nothing will fall apart. I will fix this. I will show them all. I will. He stopped mid-sentence, his phone buzzing again, this time an email notification. He snatched the device and scanned it, his eyes widening as he read. I could see the panic spreading across his face like wildfire. The email was from Mr. Whitmore's attorney, a preliminary notice about the execution of the trust, outlining assets frozen until conditions were met. The words hit him like a tidal wave. No, this can't be real, he whispered, voice trembling. Ashley stepped back, finally finding courage. It is real, she said quietly. And you need to face it before it's too late. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, not joy, but clarity. The man who had humiliated me, flaunted his new life, and thought himself untouchable was finally confronted with the truth. His empire wasn't slipping away because of me, it was slipping away because he had never truly built it, had never learned to stand on more than arrogance and entitlement. He sank onto a chair, burying his face in his hands, muttering curses and pleas that went unheard. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel fear. I felt the sharp thrill of opportunity. The inheritance wasn't mine yet, but his collapse had begun. All that remained was waiting for the right moment to take the first move. By the next day, the Whitmore estate had transformed from a house of privilege into a tense arena of power plays and whispered alliances. I walked through the halls with measured steps, aware of every eye that followed me, every murmur that trailed in my wake. Family members had begun quietly choosing sides, some leaning toward me, the outsider who had endured, and others clinging to my ex, though the cracks in his confidence were too obvious to ignore. I knew the key wasn't confrontation, it was observation. I needed patience, subtlety, and timing. I overheard one uncle muttering to a cousin about how reckless my ex had become, how his temper was dangerous and his decisions impulsive. Another aunt whispered that the company could suffer irreparable damage if he continued down this path. Each word, each glance, each hesitation was a piece of the puzzle, and I started fitting them together in my mind. Later, I found Ashley alone again in the solarium, nervously adjusting her scarf as if it could shield her from the storm she had helped create. I didn't think it would come to this, she said softly, glancing at me. He's spiraling faster than I imagined. I studied her carefully. You can either keep running with him, risking everything, or you can step back and see the truth. This isn't just about inheritance. It's about survival. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, and for the first time, I felt a faint connection, a fragile trust forming. And you're planning to take control, she asked quietly. I nodded, letting my calm mask the excitement bubbling beneath. Not yet. But when the time is right, I will. And right now, your hesitation can save you from being collateral. She nodded, swallowing, clearly absorbing the lesson, and I knew the seed of doubt had been planted. That afternoon, my ex stormed into the drawing room, anger and desperation radiating off him in waves. I can't believe this. How can everyone side against me? It's my family, my legacy, my life. His voice cracked, and Ashley flinched, stepping back instinctively. I remained at the edge of the room, arms folded, observing. Every shout, every threat, every plea he made only pushed more family members away. I noticed a few cousins exchanging looks, whispering, clearly beginning to question loyalty to a man who had no control over his own actions. By evening, Mr. Whitmore summoned me to his study once again, and I entered with calm certainty, aware of the shift in energy around me. He gestured to a seat across from him, his eyes sharp despite the frailty in his hands. You're positioning yourself well, he said, his voice quiet but approving. Patience and strategy are your allies. Your ex is too blinded by ego to see the cracks in his armor, and the family is starting to notice. Use it. Timing is everything. I nodded, letting the weight of his words settle into my mind. I understand, I said. I'll wait for the right moment. He studied me a long moment, then a faint smile touched his lips. Good. Remember, Claire, the strongest moves are made when others believe you are still on the sidelines. I left his study with a clear purpose. My ex's arrogance and recklessness had opened the door, and every misstep he made, every moment of doubt and fear, became my opportunity. The family had begun questioning him. Ashley had begun questioning him. And I, who had once been humiliated and sidelined, was finally learning how to play the game. Patience, observation, timing. That was all I needed. And soon, very soon, the tides would turn. The morning was quiet, deceptively calm, as I made my way through the Whitmore estate. The chaos of the past days had left lingering tension, a charged silence that I could feel in every room, every corner. I had spent the previous night planning carefully, weighing every angle, every potential reaction. Patience had been my ally so far, but now it was time to act. I found Ashley in the library, seated nervously with her hands clasped over her coffee mug, her eyes darting toward the doors every few seconds as though expecting an ambush. "Are you ready?" I asked quietly, keeping my voice calm, steady, unthreatening. She looked up, meeting my gaze, and for the first time I saw determination in her eyes. "I think so," she admitted. "I want to get out of this spiral before it destroys everything. Even him." I nodded. "Good. Then we start carefully. Watch, listen, and then act. Timing is everything." By noon, I had gathered information discreetly, quietly planting seeds of doubt among key family members who were beginning to waver in their loyalty to my ex. A few whispered conversations in the hallways, subtle reminders of his past failures, small truths that hinted at his recklessness, and suddenly the atmosphere began to shift. My ex, oblivious to what was happening behind the scenes, continued to spiral, lashing out at employees and family alike, his voice cracking with anger and desperation, revealing more of his weaknesses with every move. Ashley watched him from a distance, silent and calculating, clearly realizing that her survival depended on stepping carefully, choosing the right moments. By late afternoon, I was summoned to Mr. Whitmore's office. He didn't waste words. "Your first move," he said simply, sliding a folder across the desk. "Use it wisely." I opened it, scanning the documents that outlined financial accounts, property holdings, and sensitive business decisions that had been left vulnerable by my ex's carelessness. The information was power. And now it was mine to wield with precision. I took a deep breath, letting the gravity of the opportunity settle in. It wasn't about revenge, it was about positioning, strategy, survival. I would act with care, ensure that my ex faced consequences for his recklessness, and in doing so, prove that I had the foresight and composure he had never possessed. That evening, the first of the consequences began to ripple through the family. Executives sent reports, key allies hesitated, and whispers spread that my ex had mismanaged critical decisions, jeopardizing assets that were supposed to be secure. The panic that had been simmering inside him erupted in full force, wild and uncontrollable, as he realized that his father's warning wasn't a bluff. Ashley stepped closer, finally breaking the emotional hold he had maintained over her. "You're not invincible," she said quietly but firmly, and his head snapped toward her, rage mixing with disbelief. "You think this is over?" he shouted. "You think anyone will take your side? You're nothing without me." She held her ground, and for the first time, I saw the man who had once flaunted power reduced to fear and desperation. I stepped into the hall quietly, unseen, and allowed myself a small, controlled smile. The tide was turning. The game had begun in earnest, and for the first time in months, I felt the exhilarating clarity of control. My ex's arrogance had opened the door, the family was beginning to notice, and I was ready to step through it. Patience, observation, timing, everything had led to this moment. And soon, very soon, the consequences of his recklessness would reach their peak. The next morning, the estate was buzzing with unease, a nervous energy that crackled in the air like static electricity. I could feel it the moment I stepped into the main hall, whispers bouncing off the walls, glances darting my way as if the family knew something had shifted. My ex was already in the office, pacing, red-faced and wild-eyed, muttering to anyone who would listen about errors in accounts, missed meetings, and the supposed incompetence of everyone around him. Ashley stood nearby, her expression cautious but increasingly firm, her arms folded as if to shield herself from the storm he had created. I lingered at the edge of the room, careful not to attract attention, observing. Every misstep he made, every outburst he threw into the hall, only deepened the cracks in his image, and I was learning to read the signals of fear and weakness with precision. By noon, the whispers had grown into murmurs of concern. Cousins and uncles began speaking to each other behind closed doors, questioning his judgment, questioning his stability, and for the first time, openly acknowledging that he might not be fit to inherit the entirety of the Whitmore empire. I moved carefully through these conversations, subtly guiding them without ever appearing involved, letting the seeds of doubt take root naturally. Lunch was a tense affair. The family gathered, the air thick with anticipation and uncertainty. My ex tried to maintain a facade of confidence, laughing too loudly, cutting in on conversations with forced charm. Ashley sat nearby, her posture rigid, her eyes occasionally flicking toward me as if measuring the distance between survival and disaster. I caught her glance and offered the faintest smile, an acknowledgement that she understood the game now and had a choice, fall with him or step aside. Later that afternoon, I requested a meeting with Mr. Whitmore, and he granted it, the expression on his face approving yet calculating. "You've done well so far," he said quietly, gesturing for me to sit. "The family is watching, and your ex is beginning to crumble. But you must maintain subtlety. One wrong move and he may lash out, ruin more than his own position, and drag others down in the process." I nodded, absorbing every word. "I understand. Patience, observation, timing. I've learned the lesson well." He studied me a long moment before leaning back, a thin smile appearing. "Good. The next step will require public positioning. He must see that influence does not belong to him automatically, and the family must begin to witness it." I left his study with a plan forming, a clear path to begin exercising power while he remained blinded by rage and denial. That evening, the family gathered once again, ostensibly for a casual dinner, though the tension was palpable. I took a seat deliberately, projecting calm and confidence, and subtly guided conversations toward the topics that highlighted my ex's mistakes without directly confronting him. Eyes turned to me with curiosity and respect as I spoke, while his face grew redder, his agitation more obvious. Ashley, sitting beside him, subtly withdrew her support, clearly weighing the strength of my position against his unraveling. By the end of the evening, murmurs of admiration toward me began to circulate, while whispers of concern about his behavior grew louder. He stormed out after dessert, slamming the door, leaving the family stunned and quiet, and I realized the first real shift had occurred. The tide had turned. My ex's arrogance and recklessness had opened the door, the family's perception of him had begun to fracture, and I had stepped forward, carefully and deliberately, to take the first hold of the upper hand. The game was far from over, but for the first time in months, I felt the intoxicating clarity of control. And I knew, without a doubt, that soon the consequences of his spiral would reach a point from which he could not recover. The estate was alive with anticipation that morning, a subtle hum of tension that threaded through the halls and seeped into every conversation. I knew today would be pivotal. My ex had been reckless for days, and the family's growing doubts had begun to coalesce into an invisible force, a pressure he could no longer ignore. The board meeting had been scheduled in the grand conference room, ostensibly to discuss company strategy, but I knew Mr. Whitmore had orchestrated it to expose the cracks in his son's armor. As I entered, my pulse steady, I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, not just the executives, but cousins, uncles, and family friends who had taken seats along the edges, silently watching. My ex was already there, pacing in front of the large windows, arms flailing as he tried to assert authority. "This company is mine," he barked, voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I built it, and I will lead it." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions tight. I stepped forward, calm and composed, letting my presence command attention without effort. Authority, I said evenly, doesn't come from possession. It comes from competence, vision, and respect. And when arrogance blinds judgment, even the largest empires can crumble. The room fell silent. My ex's eyes locked onto me, a flash of pure rage crossing his face. "You," he shouted, pointing. "You think you can lecture me?" "You," Mr. Whitmore's voice cut through the room, steady and firm. "Enough." The sheer power in his tone made my ex freeze, his fists clenching at his sides. "You see, everyone," Mr. Whitmore said, gesturing to the gathered family and executives, I warned him. "Arrogance is not a strategy. Recklessness is not leadership. And loyalty is earned, not assumed." I could see the panic rising in my ex's eyes. He opened his mouth to protest, but the murmurs in the room had already begun. Executives whispered about his mismanagement, cousins exchanged wary looks, and even Ashley's face was now composed, her eyes calculating, no longer hiding the doubts that had been forming over days. The confrontation was swift, public, and devastating. My ex's defenses crumbled, each word from Mr. Whitmore and every whispered observation cutting through his facade. I remained at the edge, calm, collected, silently absorbing the shift. By the time the meeting concluded, the damage was clear. The room no longer viewed him as untouchable. His credibility, carefully cultivated over years, had been stripped bare, leaving only raw desperation. Ashley followed me as we stepped into the corridor afterward. That was bold," she admitted softly, her voice tinged with awe. "He won't recover from this easily." I nodded, letting a faint smile curl my lips. "No, he won't. And now, the family sees the truth. The tide has turned, and it's only a matter of time before the consequences of his spiral fully reach him." Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the estate. The game was far from over, but my position had never been stronger. The first major confrontation had exposed him publicly, shifted the family's perception, and opened the door for me to step into influence. For the first time in months, I felt the intoxicating power of control, not just over the situation, but over the narrative itself. And I knew, without a doubt, that very soon, the balance would tip completely in my favor. By the following morning, the mansion was tense, almost suffocating. Every corridor echoed with whispers, glances, and the quiet realization that the balance of power was shifting. My ex had not recovered from the public confrontation in the boardroom. He was jittery, his anger volatile, lashing out at anyone who dared question him. Executives avoided eye contact, cousins avoided conversation, and Ashley's distance had grown into deliberate detachment. I observed everything, every detail sharpening my strategy. I knew desperation was his weakness, and he was teetering on the edge. Around midday, he summoned a small meeting with key family members, his voice loud and threatening, trying to reassert control. "Listen to me," he barked. "You will not believe the lies you hear. I built this empire with my own hands. I deserve respect. I deserve control." But the murmurs had already begun. Eyes darted between him and me as family members subtly reminded each other of his recent reckless decisions. I could feel their doubts solidifying into quiet alliances that leaned toward logic, stability, and those who could navigate the storm calmly, rather than following blind rage. I stepped forward, voice soft but firm. Leadership isn't claimed by shouting or intimidation. It is earned through wisdom and stability, not ego and fear. If the company is to survive, decisions must be made with clarity, not panic. Heads turned toward me, eyes widened, and I could see the subtle nods from key family members and executives, small acknowledgments that reason had a voice, and that voice was mine. My ex's face contorted in disbelief, his hands twitching. "You, how dare you," he seethed. "You think you can, no one is trying to take you down," I interrupted, calm and composed, "but your reckless decisions have consequences. Accept it, and you might regain respect. Ignore it, and you will lose everything." Ashley, standing behind him, finally stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but clear. He's right. You've pushed everyone away, and this isn't about blame anymore. It's about survival. We need to act responsibly, not out of panic. My ex's face paled, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear. The family's collective perception had shifted, and he could no longer manipulate loyalty with anger. That evening, I met with Mr. Whitmore privately. "You've done well," he said, studying me with a sharp gaze. "The family is observing you now. Your ex is isolated by his own actions. Every step he takes out of panic strengthens your position. Continue patiently. Consolidate influence quietly, and soon the final moves will be yours." I nodded, letting the weight of his words settle. The plan was clear: patience, strategy, observation. My ex's desperation was the fuel I needed, and the family's recognition of competence was the vehicle. By nightfall, the house was quiet, but I knew the storm had only grown stronger. He would make mistakes. Ashley and key family members would continue shifting toward reason. And when the moment came, I would move decisively, seizing control of the narrative and the inheritance alike. I finally allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. The spiral was underway, the upper hand was mine to strengthen, and very soon, everything he had taken for granted would be challenged, and likely, lost. By the following morning, tension had reached a boiling point in the Whitmore estate. My ex had been restless for days, his erratic behavior escalating as he attempted to regain control. Meetings were chaotic, his voice cutting through the halls like a whip, demanding loyalty and obedience, but the cracks in his influence were now impossible to hide. Executives exchanged wary glances, family members whispered quietly among themselves, and Ashley, once a shield at his side, had grown distant, calculating her next move with care. I observed from the periphery, letting the storm of his desperation reveal every weakness. Around midday, he made his first overtly reckless move. Summoning a meeting of key business partners and family stakeholders, he attempted to force decisions on critical company matters without consultation or analysis. "I will not be undermined," he shouted, slamming documents onto the table. "The company stays under my control, and I make the decisions." Murmurs spread quickly. Board members shook their heads subtly, cousins exchanged concerned looks, and Ashley's face betrayed the growing realization that his position was irreversibly compromised. I stepped forward, calm and composed, speaking quietly but with authority. Decisions made in anger are rarely wise. Leadership requires clarity, not panic. If the company is to survive, we must act with reason and responsibility. The room fell silent, all eyes flicking toward me. I could see the disbelief in his expression, his face a mask of rage and fear, realizing the influence he once wielded had eroded beyond repair. Ashley, now fully aware of the reality, supported me subtly, her words measured. "He's right. This isn't personal, it's necessary. If we continue down this path, we risk losing everything." Panic flared in his eyes, his voice rising as he tried to regain dominance. "You think you can control this? You think everyone will follow you? I built this. I earned this." But the family was no longer listening. The subtle, careful alliances I had fostered were now forming a tide against him. Board members quietly voiced their concerns, cousins and aunts shifted their support toward reason and stability, and Ashley's presence beside me, unspoken but firm, emphasized the change in loyalty. By late afternoon, he realized his influence had crumbled entirely. Alone, frantic, and visibly shaken, he retreated to his office, muttering threats and pleas that no one could or would hear. I followed briefly, my presence deliberate but unobtrusive, letting him see that I had neither fear nor malice, only calculated purpose. Outside, the family observed in quiet acknowledgement. The once invincible heir was exposed, his recklessness laid bare, and the shift of power was undeniable. Mr. Whitmore, watching from his study, gave a small nod of approval. "Patience," he murmured. "The final stage is near." I allowed myself a private moment of satisfaction. The first moves were complete. His collapse, precipitated by his own arrogance and misjudgment, was now irreversible. All that remained was the final step, solidifying my position and ensuring that the inheritance, influence, and stability would rest where it rightfully belonged. The tide had turned, and I was ready to ride it to the end. The morning of the will's execution arrived with a sense of inevitability. The Whitmore estate was unusually quiet, the calm before a storm that everyone could feel but no one dared acknowledge. I arrived early, moving through the halls with purpose, fully aware of the subtle glances, the unspoken calculations of family members, and the tremor of tension in the air. My ex was already present, pacing near the grand staircase, jaw clenched, fists tight. His attempts at composure were failing, every movement betrayed anxiety, and the desperate, volatile energy that had been building for weeks now radiated from him like heat. Ashley stood at a distance, her posture firm yet cautious, clearly ready to step away from him if necessary. I met her eyes briefly, and she gave a subtle nod, silently acknowledging the shift that had occurred. The attorney arrived, a calm, deliberate presence, carrying the sealed documents that would determine the future of the Whitmore fortune. My ex tried to assert authority, but the room's attention was no longer his to command. "We're ready to proceed," the attorney announced, voice steady. The family gathered in tense anticipation, murmurs dying to whispers. My ex's face tightened, a mixture of fury, disbelief, and desperation. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "I've earned this. You can't just," Mr. Whitmore's voice cut through, low and commanding. "Enough." The conditions were clear. Actions have consequences. Today, everything will be finalized. The attorney broke the seal and began reading aloud the provisions of the will. Every sentence was precise, every clause deliberate, exposing my ex's failings and the redistribution of assets in ways he had never anticipated. I could see his posture stiffen, his face drain of color as the implications sank in. "The estate shall remain in trust," the attorney read, "until the designated successor demonstrates the ability to manage with wisdom, integrity, and stability. Failure to meet these conditions will result in redistribution at the discretion of the trustee." Eyes turned to me as the final stipulations were read. Significant portions of the estate, previously assumed to be his, were now directed toward stability measures and those who had shown competence, my position cemented by foresight and patience. My ex's hands trembled at his sides, his voice a cracked whisper. "No, this isn't possible." Ashley, finally free from his shadow, stepped forward, speaking clearly for all to hear. "It's real. And it's the result of your choices. You lost control because of yourself." The room was silent, the weight of truth settling on everyone. My ex sank into a chair, defeated, exposed, and utterly powerless, while the family's perception had fully shifted. I stood quietly, observing, letting the moment resonate. No gloating, no vengeance, only the clarity of strategy realized, patience rewarded, and justice measured. Mr. Whitmore's gaze met mine briefly, a small, approving nod acknowledging the course I had navigated with intelligence and restraint. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the estate in warm light. I stepped onto the terrace, breathing deeply, absorbing the calm after the storm. The final showdown was complete. My ex had been unmasked, the family's loyalty had shifted, and the inheritance, secured by patience, strategy, and resolve, was now in capable hands. Ashley lingered nearby, silent, her expression a mix of relief and newfound respect. I smiled faintly. "It's over," I said quietly. "And it's finally ours to navigate wisely." The estate, once a battlefield of ego and arrogance, had transformed into a place of calculated stability. The lessons of patience, observation, and timing had carried me to victory, and the power of foresight had finally prevailed. My ex, broken by his own recklessness, slumped in defeat, while I, having endured humiliation and doubt, now stood at the center of a storm turned triumph, a quiet, undeniable, and satisfying victory. The days after the will's execution were quieter, but the air was heavy with reflection. The Whitmore estate had returned to a semblance of calm, yet the tension of recent weeks lingered like a shadow. My ex remained in the house, but he no longer commanded attention. His once imposing presence had been replaced by visible defeat. He moved quietly, avoiding eye contact, while the family's subtle glances reminded him that influence could no longer be assumed. I spent the mornings walking through the estate, observing the subtle shifts in relationships, the cautious interactions, and the unspoken acknowledgement that balance had finally returned. Ashley, now free from his shadow, approached me one afternoon in the solarium. Her voice was soft but steady. I never thought I'd see it end like this, she admitted. I thought loyalty meant following him no matter what. But I see now, strength comes from knowing when to act wisely, not blindly. I nodded, letting a small smile play across my lips. It wasn't about revenge. It was about patience, observation, and choosing the right moment. He brought this on himself. She exhaled, relief and understanding mingling on her face. And you handled it with grace. I never expected anyone to endure what you did and come out on top. I shrugged lightly, though inwardly I felt the weight of every strategy, every calculated move that had brought us here. Grace is just another form of strength, I said quietly. The family began to adjust. Conversations grew calmer, and trust slowly returned where reckless arrogance had destroyed it. Cousins and uncles approached me with questions, seeking guidance rather than confrontation, and even the executives, once fearful of my ex's erratic temper, now looked to reason and foresight, qualities they now associated with me. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the estate, I found myself alone on the terrace, breathing in the calm. The battle had been hard, emotional, and exhausting, but it had revealed an important truth: integrity, patience, and strategy outlast arrogance and recklessness every time. My ex remained inside, a shadow of his former self, while the family's trust and influence had shifted, firmly establishing a foundation of stability. Ashley joined me, her expression quiet but reflective. I finally understand, she said softly. It's not just about winning. It's about knowing your worth, your limits, and when to act. I smiled faintly, the satisfaction in my chest mingling with relief. Exactly. And sometimes, the greatest victories come not from aggression, but from patience and resolve. The estate was still, the storms of the past weeks fading into memory, leaving clarity and balance in their wake. I had endured humiliation, manipulation, and doubt, but through strategy, observation, and courage, I had secured both my position and the respect of those around me. The lessons lingered, quiet but powerful. Power is nothing without patience, patience is nothing without purpose, and purpose without integrity is empty. I breathed deeply, letting the warm light settle over me. The battle had ended, the storm had passed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a calm certainty. I had not only survived, but prevailed, and in doing so, had claimed not just inheritance, but dignity, respect, and the knowledge that I could endure anything life placed before me. Months had passed since the storm of the Whitmore inheritance had finally settled. The estate, once a battlefield of arrogance and ego, had become a place of quiet stability. Morning sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the polished floors and calm faces of a family who had learned to breathe again. I walked through the halls with a sense of purpose, no longer an outsider, no longer a target, but a recognized presence of influence, integrity, and reason. Ashley met me in the solarium that morning, holding 2 mugs of coffee, her demeanor relaxed, confident. I never thought we'd see peace here, she said with a small smile, handing me a mug. I accepted it, warmth radiating through my hands. Peace isn't given. It's earned, I said softly. And sometimes it comes after the hardest storms. She nodded, taking a sip. I've learned a lot watching you. About patience, strategy, and strength. I felt a quiet pride, not in triumph over my ex, but in having endured, navigated, and preserved dignity in a world built on ego and entitlement. The family had adjusted as well. Cousins who once whispered behind my back now approached with respect. Executives sought my counsel, trusting insight over impulse. Even my ex remained in the house, but he was a shadow of his former arrogance, silent, withdrawn, a reminder of what happens when recklessness meets consequence. I no longer felt anger or resentment toward him. What he had lost was the result of his own choices, and watching him face the consequences had been enough. Life had a way of revealing truth in the harshest ways, and I had learned to move with it rather than against it. The estate hummed with quiet activity. Family dinners were calmer, conversations purposeful. I found myself mentoring younger cousins, guiding executives in thoughtful decisions, and slowly, the Whitmore legacy was being restored, not through domination, but through reason, care, and strategic foresight. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills surrounding the estate, I stood on the terrace, watching the golden light spill across the gardens. Ashley joined me, and for the first time, we spoke not of strategy or survival, but of life, of possibilities. "Do you think he'll ever recover?" she asked quietly, nodding toward the house. I shook my head gently, a faint smile tugging at my lips. Recovery isn't guaranteed for those who refuse to learn from their mistakes. But that's not our burden anymore. Silence settled comfortably between us, the weight of past conflicts giving way to a calm, quiet certainty. I had survived betrayal, humiliation, and manipulation, and in doing so, I had earned far more than money or property. I had earned respect, dignity, and the knowledge that no storm, no matter how fierce, could break me. The Whitmore estate, once a battlefield, now felt like home. And I, having navigated its treacherous waters, finally felt the deep, satisfying peace of having emerged not just victorious, but unshaken. Life would continue, challenges would arise, but the lessons of patience, observation, and strategic courage would remain. And with them, I knew I could face anything.